Normally, when I would be introducing myself to a business community or a community of professionals engaged in the wider sustainability space, I would be saying that I'm working in the global sustainability team at SAP, reporting to our Chief Sustainability Officer. And my special area of focus is driving transformation and change management in the context of sustainability, especially engaging our different stakeholders and more than 100,000 employees on our journey. Last week, I was put to a test then of this introduction. Before diving into the content of the topic, I just wanted to share this little anecdote. I was visiting my nephew on his birthday, who just turned 8 years old. And I was coming a bit later, joining them for dinner because I was working in the home office, just finishing off a conference call. And then I was standing in front of this table of 8 pairs of eyes looking at me, aged 5 to 8 years old. And they asked, "Why are you late?" And I said, "Well, I was still working, so I'm sorry, but I'm happy to be here now." And then one of his friends asked me, "What do you do at work?" And I was thinking, how do you explain that to a 5-year-old in a way that they could understand it too? And then I was thinking a little bit, and then after a little pause, I just said, well, I work for a big software company, and I try to help them work in a way that is more environmentally and human-friendly. And then I felt like almost standing in front of a jury. But after a second, they nodded approvingly and then said, "That makes sense. That's a good work to do." And while it sometimes sounds a bit cheesy to talk that it's really for the next generation and the children, especially me as a person not having children of my own, it did feel like this is actually what we're really doing it for, right? I mean, it is about the next generation then, and they really made my day. I felt so energized and inspired afterwards to continue with my work. So that was a great experience for me. With that, I'll start talking a bit more business of matter and start with introducing a big picture overview of the strategic approach to sustainability at SAP. Then I would just like to pick out a few examples of how we're using digitization then to drive progress towards sustainability and specifically the SDGs, and would like to conclude with some thoughts and experiences about what role collaboration also plays both internally and externally across different organizational borders towards it. And I was thinking that I would probably also more anecdotally talk about things that I think went well, which proved to be key success factors, but maybe also some of the challenges that I see. And then later on the roundtable, probably dive into discussion on that then. So for our approach towards sustainability at SAP, it is really derived out of our company's purpose to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And we started that journey officially 10 years ago, more than 10 years. Last year we celebrated the 10th anniversary in 2009. And from the very beginning we were looking at this holistic approach that we've heard about more already today than from other presenters, that it is really not just about the environmental space, but making this connection then of creating positive economic, social, and environmental impact, and keep the planetary boundaries in mind for that. Being in a software industry means that we are in the lucky position that perhaps compared to other industries, our environmental and social footprint is not as heavy, which means that our biggest lever actually is with our reach that we could have through our customers and our solutions. That's why we have this twofold approach of being an enabler and having more than 440,000 customers. And then there are measures where you could say there are 77% of business transactions worldwide in some way being touched by an SAP system. That just shows some of the reach that you could potentially have, and maybe also some of the responsibility and obligation that you would also have to bring sustainability into those transactions. So that's the key focus, but of course you wouldn't be credible in doing so if you wouldn't be walking the talk and leading by example yourselves. So of course you'll have to do your homework and make sure that you're applying sustainable principles principles then in your own operations and business practices, and embedding that into how you steer and drive your business and processes. So that's where we're starting from, which is of course a very broad spectrum. So when we thought about how we can actually focus our impact, we've worked with different stakeholders, including our external sustainability advisory panel, where we also have the external validation similar to what Bayer presented, but also our internal sustainability council, where we have one leaders appointed by our executive board members to represent their respective board area and talk about which area should we focus on specifically then. And we've identified 7 areas. In the more environmental space, that would probably be naturally climate action and circular economy that we've also heard more about already today. In the social space, there's a lot around equality, which with the social justice discussion this year is becoming even more relevant than ever. But for us, it's also very much about driving skilled workforce, especially in the digital skills area. I'll be talking more about that later on. And fostering social and inclusive entrepreneurship. It's more of a layer across. We have the holistic steering and reporting part. I'll be talking about it in the partnerships section because we have a very interesting partnership in there. But it also entails what we're doing ourselves internally then in terms of looking at our performance in a holistic way, where we not just look at financial results and the profits and revenues that we generate, but also how they are interconnected then with our environmental and social performance, and how these different dimensions actually impact each other, which we disclose in our integrated report every year. But we also include that actually in our quarterly financial reporting. So each quarter when we actually report about the quarterly financial results, we also at the same time talk about our CO2 emissions, even if the investors might not all want to hear about that then, but they just get those numbers also made transparent, as well as our social performance through measures or KPIs like our employee retention, our women in management, and employee engagement. And as a basic layer, we have ethical business practices in there. For us in the software industry, this includes the dimension of not necessarily looking at digitization as a means in itself, even though we see a lot of potential in there, and I'll be showing more examples of that then. But it is also something that we have to shape in a responsible way. There are risks in it too, not just opportunities, as probably in everything. And that's why we've taken on the task of looking at the topic of artificial intelligence, for instance, AI, very seriously to reflect and consider those potential negative implications it could also have, and have come up with AI ethics guidelines for our own internal organization. Again, there we have also tried to get external expertise in through an AI ethics advisory board. We've been working with the EU and the German government in digital corporate digital responsibility initiatives then to help shape that then also and share the experiences with others, and have come up with an AI ethics board. We're just working on launching an AI ethics policy internally to give even more guidance to our employees then, and to make sure that we are shaping our digitization offerings in a responsible way. So these are just some of the examples then beyond having a human rights commitment policy, driving those aspects, being in the UN Global Compact, following those then as a guiding principle, but also looking at the tricky questions in terms of how you apply those values that incorporate internally then also into your business. We are getting questions from employees more and more in terms of, well, if we have this commitment then, for instance, to become carbon neutral by 2025 and to help the world run better and improve people's lives, is it good to do business with every customer who might not share that same vision or might not always be complying with it then? So we've started this ethical discussion. Our Sustainability Council has been tasked with that to come up with recommendations for the more difficult questions to the executive board and decide on that. It's a lengthy process, it's a learning process for us too. And one thing that we've come up so far with is that we wanted to make sure that our software that we're selling to big corporations worldwide, where the lines are sometimes a little bit blurry in terms of the use, that it is not used for the production as so of controversial weapons, for instance. So we're working with our legal department to make sure how we can embed that into terms and conditions moving forward. That's just one of those examples. The foundation of it all is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I know that companies are having different perspectives on how useful they are as a framework, as an additional framework, I have to say, because there are so many other frameworks in place as well to follow and standards. And sometimes that makes it rather challenging then also in terms of the reporting and the efforts that you put into those then. We have been on that journey, as I said, since 10 years. So that was even before the Sustainable Development Goals were put in place. But of course, being in sustainability, we've been observing it closely when the whole stakeholder dialogue process, which took, I think, more than 2 years, started then to have the successors of the Millennium Development Goals and what actually these SDGs really mean. So we did want to look at what it could mean for us. And while we're not saying that it's like the Holy Grail, we did feel it was helpful as a common framework to have a common language with all others, and also break down sustainability maybe as a complex concept a bit more. Especially with our employees, we've seen that sometimes they weren't quite clear what sustainability really would mean. And seeing those 17 SDGs, they could relate with those. I mean, 17 is a bit much, even if you add then that it's 169 sub-targets and so on. But still it felt like, okay, that makes sense. Now I can understand those different dimensions. So it helped us tremendously to drive the understanding and awareness of employees forward, and that's why we've decided also to use this very much as a basis. The interesting thing also is that it has kind of fueled a new level of energy with many of the teams and departments, and maybe it was just by coincidence because it came at a time where general public awareness for sustainability was increasing. But as a core sustainability department, we were suddenly approached by different experts, different departments within SAP who suddenly told us about initiatives that they have started on their own that would be contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals without us always necessarily having to push it, but there was really a pull starting. So there was, for instance, an analytics team that came up and suggested that we should be joining the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data that was formed from the UN side on that then, which made a lot of sense from their perspective. So it was great to see that they triggered that process, which was a bit more surprising than, for instance, our CSR team coming up with the proposal of working together with UNICEF then on digital skills initiative, because that was more naturally fall into their area. So that's why the SDGs became part of our framework and kind of guiding compass for driving our efforts in the company. And when we started off, we looked at all of the 17. We started exploring what could digital technology actually do to contribute to those. And we've created a little web book or interactive web page where we would, first of all, describe what the SDG is about then in the context of also using digital technology for it. We would kind of feature some of our customer stories, how they are using digital technology, and then also bring in examples of what we're doing ourselves to that. And we even created a little online quiz around that then to make it a little bit more interactive in terms of the experience. So that was helpful as a starting point. But then we got mixed feedback on that, actually. It was interesting that there was a critical article, I can't recall exactly which German business newspaper wrote that then, who was looking at different companies addressing the SDGs as a working group also with eConsens. And they were finger pointing at some who would be cherry picking, as they call that, on the SDGs. And while we were positively surprised that they pointed out that we were looking at all of them because they referred to this web book, we actually got feedback from our external sustainability advisory panel that they felt it didn't seem very credible that we would be addressing all 17 of them in the same way, even if we are serving 25 industries and could have indirect impacts on many of them. Still, it is a bit arbitrary then just to make those connections then. So we felt it made a lot of sense, that feedback that we got from their side, and therefore over time evolved to focus a bit more. 8 still seem a bit too much in terms of real focus and prioritization, but we're continuing on our journey to narrow it down, and have picked out the 3 being good health and well-being. We wouldn't have thought that this year it becomes that relevant, and that we could play a major role by working with the German government on the Corona Warn App. Quality education, then certainly decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequalities, driving responsible consumption and production, especially in the circular economy, climate action, and the partnerships. And I'll come up with some of those little examples now. Starting with climate action, because that's also the one that's kind of in focus then for today's event. And here we've been moving forward, when you remember our twofold approach of being enabler, exemplar, maybe a bit faster on the exemplar side when it comes to our own operations than on the enabler side. We did have environmental health and safety management solutions right from the beginning in 2009, but they seem to be a bit more of niche solutions where you could already track and report on emissions and other environmental factors. But internally, we started off with bold ambitions then in terms of reducing our own carbon emissions. And in 2009, for instance, we set ourselves the target to reduce our emissions back to the levels of 2000 by 2020. And we achieved that target ahead of time in 2017, which was surprising because the company had actually grown 4-fold since then. So we were 4 times as many employees. And I just talked in the discussion rounds before about that then, since much of our emissions actually comes from our business travel. It's very much tied also to the number of employees. So we were proud to do that. But we, already before that, also realized, okay, so 2020 is approaching for our target. We need to take up the next level of ambition, right? What's next then in terms of our target? And the natural choice was to say, okay, let's try to go for carbon neutral. And we decided then that we would make the commitment then to become carbon neutral by 2025. We also have set ourselves science-based targets in line with 1.5 degrees. And I somehow clicked further. Sorry for that. And having made that experience internally truly helped us then to come up with ideas and solutions for driving that further also within our solution portfolio for our customers. So earlier this year, we launched the Climate 21 program and really made the commitment then to embed analytical capabilities into our software solutions that help companies then drive their resource management and their business processes then, so that they could track and monitor and measure the carbon emissions throughout their supply chain down to the product level. So in June, we launched the first little product. It's a 3-year roadmap. The first little product being product carbon footprint analytics. And talking about collaboration, this is one of the examples where you team up with a group of co-innovation partners and actually co-develop that, then also listening a lot to their feedback and input. I think there seems to be animations in there in the presentation, which is why it probably continues to flip on, but I'll just go back then. So that was the part on the on the carbon footprint analytics. On the circular economy side, we equally feel that digital technologies can actually very much help to create data and insights and transparency through that, then to help drive that transition forward. And there are different ways of doing so. I mean, if you consider that today, probably just not even 9% of the economy is really circular, there's still 91% that needs to be turned into circular. I love the example of Alping, how they're doing that already. And you can see in that example that it starts already in the design phase, that you really start planning from the onset of how you can design your product so that it's fit for circularity from that very beginning. And we've seen that in collaboration then, because we joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, hoping that we could benefit then also from their expertise and knowledge in the space of circular economy, but also through their network and platforms, start collaboration with other partners, be it NGOs, be it academia, as well as other businesses, to team up for this then. That 90% of the environmental impact is really happening at this design phase. So last week, or the week before, I'm confusing time a little bit maybe, at the London Design Festival, we launched the Circular Design Project together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and brought in the community of designers to talk about how in the retail space, in the built environment, in the food space, we could actually then start building circular economy from there. And it comes down also to providing them then, when they start thinking about which materials they would be using for the product that they have in mind, that they just get shown different alternatives and the environmental impact that each of those alternatives have. So that next to cost and other qualitative features that those materials have, they can also compare these data then and consider them then for the decisions they make in terms of which products should be used. And it is very much a cooperation aspect, because it has to happen end to end across all kinds of business sectors, across all kinds of phases of the life cycle. The issue about collaboration in such spaces often is trust. And in certain ways, data, reliable data, can help build that trust, because you just have something objective that you can rely on then. So that's again where we hope to make a difference. Picking out one specific area of the circular economy is plastics. I mean, overall, the idea of the circular economy certainly is to keep materials in use longer. It's a nutrient, as we've heard before. It is any kind of material actually has a certain value, and to keep up that value, it's really about making sure that it's not being wasted and keeps flowing in the cycle then, in the circle. So that's specifically relevant then for plastics, which maybe lately, I've heard that earlier today, then also someone mentioned that due to the corona crisis, it has gone down a bit then, but there was certainly a lot of public awareness before that then, in terms of seeing all the plastics that's going into the oceans that actually end up then also even within our own bodies. I mean, I remember the little fact and anecdote that each of us through the food supply chain in the end actually consumes like a credit card size of plastic each day through the meals that we consume, which is pretty scary for many people. We've launched then a pilot then in the UK around the plastics cloud through design thinking workshops, bringing together again different players of the business to see what kind of ideas could we actually have to make a difference. We've also joined Soul Buffalo on an expedition, which was a very interesting experience actually, because they were bringing together the big plastic creators, producers, the big retail companies, consumer product companies, but also NGOs, science. and then SAP. And most of them who were part of that expedition, they went to the Atlantic Gyre, where they could actually see all the plastic floating there. And I think the idea of So Buffalo as an NGO was really to make it very a hands-on feeling experience, right? That would really wake people up. But they really did wonder, why are you here at the table? What could you actually do about this then? Because it was so obvious what the other players could be doing. And after a week of talking about their different ideas of changing the models and the systems, they did always come back to a certain point where it was, well, but what kind of enabling IT infrastructure or tools or data support could we have for that then? So it's a bit hidden maybe, always somewhat in the back seat, but it does always continue to play a role. So that was really exciting. And then beginning of this year, we teamed up with the World Economic Forum, became part of the Global Plastics Action Partnership, then started working on a pilot where we would be also reusing, in the idea of the circular economy, other solutions that we already had in place in Ghana. There we had already in place the rural sourcing management solution, which is actually about traceability across product supply chains to connect smallholder farmers to global supply chains when it came to consumer product companies or farmer good materials then. And we used or adapted that solution then to connect waste pickers as a more informal sector of the economy there to the more formal waste structure, recycling infrastructure in Ghana then, and the big consumer product companies and packaging companies, so that this loop could be closed, and then you would actually get real insights into how much plastics do we have available that can be put into the recycling system and can be reused. So that was a very inspiring project. But having transparency in the supply chain doesn't only help you to reduce the environmental impact, it can also significantly help you to improve the social impact, especially when you want to detect and early on identify risks in terms of child labor, forced labor in your supply chain, making sure that labor conditions and human rights are respected, but also bringing in supplier diversity, for instance. Then. So we have in the procurement area solutions that can help procurement professionals actually make those choices then, so that they again have the data, they have dashboards or cockpits where they can have early alerts of their suppliers in terms of are there any abuses being reported on also in other media. So it brings in data, for instance, from EcoVadis and other of these platforms. Of course, you fill in like self-assessment questionnaires, but it also observes media, independent media, and what kind of news are coming in there to map that against that then. And we just earlier this week launched an initiative where we're trying to inspire other companies then by bringing into our business networks social enterprises and diverse suppliers, and inspire that just 5%, hopefully, of the corporate spend actually goes into the direction of certified social enterprises and diverse suppliers to make the shift in movement. I mentioned that we're trying to close the gap and also mitigate some of the risks of digitization, to not leave anyone behind and make sure that people thrive also in the future digital economy then. It might take away some jobs in certain cases. I mean, let's be honest about that then. And through reskilling and coming up with skills workshops and coding workshops, we're trying to help and prepare, especially then in disadvantaged communities then, and in some of the developing countries, the future workforce to be part of those economies then, and have partnered with UNICEF around that then, and other NGOs also to drive that forward and reach youth and children in across more than 100 countries. So coming back to the partnership and collaboration perspective, I've mentioned in the very beginning one very interesting partnership that we're working on right now is in the holistic steering and reporting space. and that's the Value Balancing Alliance. We know that there's still a lot to do in terms of real measurement of impact and real disclosing of the numbers and connecting financial and non-financial aspects, having a clear standard, actually, coming up with an accounting standard that can help. So we were very pleased to join the Value Balancing Alliance, which is exactly targeting at that then, and has also been tasked by the EU as part of the Green Deal then to develop that then together with the big four, who are the consultancies then and auditors, but also industrial companies, and academia and the OECD to develop exactly that standard and share that. In closing, I would say that overall the collaboration aspect is something that takes trust on the one hand side, and also time then to build that trust. But it is something where you can really just bring in so many new different perspectives. And in the SDG space, I feel it's even more important than maybe otherwise too, is to really find your focus and prioritization then. After the SDGs have come out and we've committed strongly to them, we've been hearing or being approached by so many different organizations who all want to partner around the SDGs. We could have been having talks with different of them then with 5 of them every week, right? And as a company, you do have to somehow bundle your resources and focus them on specific aspects. So this has really been a lessons learned from our perspective to make your choices. It helps that we've made the prioritization of the 8 SDGs, but also in terms of the partnerships, rather focus less is more, and have true impact together with them instead of just having a whole bundle and then you're just having bits and pieces all over the place. So I think time's up and I look forward to the further discussion. Thank you.